As we celebrate Youth Month, UNICEF reports that 73% of youth and children needed mental support, and the COVID-19 pandemic increased the mental health burden that young people face. A new report poll found that 38% of those who felt they needed mental health support actively sought help, and a further 67% of the respondents stepped up to support a friend's mental well-being. To further unpack this, we are joined by Professor Saths Cooper, President of the Pan-African Psychology Union. Prof, very good afternoon. Appreciate your time today. What do you read into those numbers, certainly where young people are concerned?
That's to be expected, given the backdrop that you just presented, that COVID has taken its toll on not only our country, but the entire continent and globally. So you're seeing a rise in mental health issues, particularly depression and certain anxiety, given that we've had distance learning, given that we've had lockdowns. The anxiety levels have increased, and together with anxiety, depression are the two greatest mental health issues confronting humanity, let alone us in the southern tip of the continent.
So, Prof, we've got these numbers that speak to the last few months, if you will, at COVID, I think almost 2 years in our rear view mirror. But let's go back 10 years, 20 years. What are the cases of depression like amongst young people? Has there been a significant change?
Well, look, I think that we've seen one of the stark effects of mental health is the large number of suicides that we have amongst young people. And that becomes somewhat of a localized epidemic if it happens in a school environment, and young people in particular. It becomes something where they get affected and feel they need to do something about their sorry lot and join the person who is away from them. I'm giving a very simplistic reason. So that has been fairly consistent, and it's been on the rise. I don't have the statistics on hand now, but we should always be aware of changes in attitude, in mood, in behavior of young people. So certain schools have the opportunity, and these are the richer schools, where the elite in our country, less than 1/5 of the population, send their children to, and teachers and others pick those symptoms up and refer children in their care to a clinical psychologist, a medical practitioner, a social worker, whoever they're linked with to deal with the issues that the kids under their care present with. Now, for the majority of our children, we don't have that. We know that schooling has been intermittent at best post-COVID, and we know that particularly in universities and high schools, there are high numbers of dropouts. By this time of the year, a large number drop out, particularly when you're in your first year of university. So the issues that have been racking our young people are not new. They've been there forever. We just commemorated yesterday the 47th anniversary of young people taking to the streets in Soweto and elsewhere in the country. And perhaps I can give an opinion looking backwards that was probably the most vibrant generation of children, teenagers, and persons in their early 20s that we've ever had, because they stood up against one of the worst systems of oppression that the world has seen after the Second World War. So they were on a high, if you like, in their opposition to that racist system. Subsequently, there was trauma, lots of anxiety, lots of watchfulness, because they were exposed to shootings, they were exposed to killings of persons they knew. So all that trauma and so on was counteracted by the mobilization of young people. Since that time and consistently until democracy, we've seen young people, the majority of young people throughout our country, taking to the streets, being part of the 29th year of democracy, if you like, ushering that in. However, in terms of socioeconomic conditions and other opportunities, they're worse off now than perhaps they've ever been, because we have the highest unemployment rates in the world and the lowest employment rates in the world. So
Prof, if you'll allow me to interject and obviously ask a couple of questions. Now, one of those questions is around the stigma surrounding mental health and how it affects young people's willingness to seek help. How big is this? Because I'd imagine that around with that stigma, and for a lot of young people, are issues around peer pressure.
Well, look, the fortunate thing we have now is social media. So there's always somebody watching out for somebody else, and they say, what's happened? We haven't heard from Hugo in the last 2 days because we've been chatting. What's happened? So there is that. The positive side of that is that nearly all people in this country have access to a smartphone, so they can get help. They can Google, they can do whatever, and they'll find some kind of help. Amongst themselves, they can find help. However, the pressure that comes from an adult society, and by the way, adults in this country are a minority, from that adult society that ek is nie mal nie, I'm not mad, it's only the weak that seek help. That kind of mentality still prevails. However, more and more people are seeking help, and that's why that statistic that you gave in the introduction is welcome, because more people are seeking help. However, the numbers of persons qualified and capable in our country to provide that help, whether it's on helplines or face-to-face or in whatever manner, are too few to meet the needs. Our education system is failing us in many ways, not only in the skills gap, but also in preparing healthy young people, preparing them physically and psychologically to be healthy and take their rightful place in society. So we need our higher education institutions to step up the intake of persons going into psychology, for instance, which is still a profession that it is exceedingly hard to get into, and then people end up in other callings than that. So we need to open up our doors to more able young people wanting to become psychologists, and we should introduce other levels of care that don't make it as hard like it currently is. So
while we at that conversation, are you as a Pan-African Psychology Union having conversations with the Department of Education, firstly? And secondly, will those conversations then speak to how do you equip young people within schools, as part of the curricula for some of them to be able to, not necessarily the full spectrum of counseling or support, but at the very least be able to identify where there are needs to then refer? Because I'd imagine that in many schools they have a buddy system where one pupil is attached to another and supports him. Would a similar system where a number of young people within the school system at any given time have these skills?
No. That's a flat answer to the issue. I think we've had education leaders resistant to this over time. I know that the Psychological Society of this country has approached the Department of Basic Education before this current minister, and I think that it's about time that the Psychology Society went back to the current minister and reintroduced exactly what you're talking about, so that we can create a cohort of young people who can help themselves and help others, because there's nothing as important as peers teaching one another and helping one another. It's better because, Hugo, you are an adult. I am an older adult. I cannot understand all those issues that kids confront right now.
Sure.
I know some of the issues, but we should be able to create that. So throughout the continent, we're facing similar issues. I'm pleased to say that north of our borders, west of our borders, and east of our borders, countries are changing their attitudes. In fact, South Africa, which is the richest country on the continent right now, is way behind. I know the Minister of Higher Education is a psychologist. I know that the Minister of Health is progressive. These two ministers need to get together and look at, and we will facilitate that, look at how we can change our physical and our psychological health in this country so that the sense of hopelessness and helplessness is reduced.
Final thoughts on this, and this might be a bit of a theory from me. How do we strengthen the resolve of young people, or how do we grow mental strength for young people? Because obviously, I was reading a statistic that says that 10 to 14-year-olds are amongst the highest, that demographic amongst the highest individuals that commit suicide. So at that age group, 10 to 14, they're obviously impressionable. But how do I, as a parent, how does the next person as a parent or guardian equip their children or those kids that they look after with a mental strength and awareness that protects them? Because a lot of this is really mental, is it not?
Yes. In fact, there's a very old statistic, Hero, that tells us, it comes from the last century, that 1 in 2 persons with a physical ailment or symptom has a psychological basis to that problem. The age group, the age cohort you've pointed to is getting into pubescence. They are in puberty and post-puberty, so that they're highest at risk because most of us are unable to deal with that pubescence effectively, not in the home, not in the school, and certainly not in the recreational, sporting, and social environments, and we need to change that. You raised earlier the issue of buddy system. That's important. But parents, especially new parents, need to also seek out help on how to deal with their children. I know there are professional bodies, I've mentioned the Psychological Society of South Africa, that attempt to do online and other events for the public where people can get help on how to deal with X or Y issue. How do I deal with discipline, for instance, without beating to a pulp my child? How do I pick up issues of depression that my child is experiencing, or bullying for that matter, cyber or otherwise? All those can be dealt with if we have a more inclusive approach, teaching our children and to growing them to become people, young people, older people who truly make a difference in this country and help turn around this country, because God knows we need a change, and that change can only come with our young people and our children in particular.
Professor Saths Cooper, President of the Pan-African Psychology Union, appreciate your time